The desert is quiet in a way that almost feels alive. At night, the dunes stretch like waves of shadow, shifting under the pale silver of the moon. My campfire crackled softly, its glow fragile against the endless dark. The air was dry, heavy, carrying only the faint hum of wind moving over stone. I sat alone by my tent, watching the firelight flicker against the sand when I heard it, a low sound, too deep to be the wind. It carried through the stillness like a growl, swallowed by distance. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the desert playing tricks, but then I saw a movement along the ridge. Something on four legs, its outline sharp and wrong against the horizon. It didn't move like a coyote. It didn't move like anything I had ever seen. That's when I realized I wasn't the only one out there. The desert was quiet. Cold air pressed against my skin, sharp under the pale moonlight. The fire crackled, thin smoke curling up toward fading stars. I leaned closer to it. The warmth was small, fragile, like it could disappear if I blinked. Sand shifted under my boots. Soft, hollow, then a low growl, carried on the wind. Far, then closer, curling around the edges of the firelight. I froze. It didn't sound like anything I'd ever heard. A throat somewhere deep beneath the earth, vibrating. It made the hairs along my arms stiffen. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a coyote, maybe a fox. But the growl lingered, circling, slow, deliberate. The fire's glow stretched shadows long across the sand. Each one trembled as if the darkness itself had lungs. I could feel it watching, even when I didn't want to. The wind carried more than heat. It brought the smell of dry earth, of burnt sage I didn't remember burning. And underneath it, something wet, something alive. I shifted my gaze. Darkness rolled like water beyond the fire. It seemed heavier there, almost solid. Another growl, closer this time. Underneath it, a soft dragging sound, like claws brushing over stone. I swallowed. My throat felt too dry. The fire popped. A spark flew and landed on the sand. Tiny bright, and then silence. I listened, every breath loud in my own ears. A rustling, subtle, not from the wind. It came from all around. The circle I'd imagined was not a circle at all. I wanted to speak. The words died in my mouth. Even the quiet seemed to hold its breath. I felt the heat of the fire on my face, and yet the darkness pressed colder against my back. It was close, just beyond reach, close enough that the shadows moved in patterns my mind couldn't track. The growl returned, this time layered, a low hum underneath it, vibrating through the soles of my feet, through the bones in my chest. I could feel it, not hear it, like the desert itself was speaking. I shifted, and the sand whispered against my fingers. I tried to follow the sound, but it was everywhere and nowhere, a circle expanding, shrinking. The wind died for a moment. The fire hissed, small sparks rising. And in that pause, I swore I saw something move just beyond the flames. A shape, or maybe a shadow, stretched too long to be natural. It froze, then vanished. I tried to convince myself again. Alone, safe, a coyote, a trick of the light. But the growl, it didn't belong to any coyote I knew. It was patient, waiting, knowing. I hugged my knees. The fire's warmth was all I had. My own heartbeat felt loud. I could hear the brush of sand against the bark of a nearby dead shrub. And then a soft exhale, almost human, almost not. I closed my eyes. The growl faded into the wind, but the memory of it clung, curling around my thoughts like smoke. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run into the cold night, but I stayed, because moving would make me real to whatever was out there, and maybe it was better if I stayed still. The fire crackled, the shadows danced, and the desert held its secret just beyond the light. I stayed there until the moon dipped low, until the stars trembled in the silence. And even then I knew it hadn't left. It had only waited. The wind had dropped by morning. The dunes were still, smooth as pale skin under the sun. I unzipped the tent and peeked outside. Footprints, fresh, deep impressions pressed into sand. Too large for coyotes, too wrong for wolves. They weren't just around the tent. They circled it, slow, deliberate, close enough that I could almost feel the weight of something watching me through the fabric. The air smelled of damp sand and something else. Iron maybe, or rust. I stepped out, boots sinking into the cold grains. The prints led away, back into the dunes, curving, twisting, like they didn't belong to a creature bound by normal rules. The quiet was heavy, not the soft quiet of dawn, not even the soft rustle wind through dune grass. It was static, like the world had paused to watch me. I crouched, tracing the edges with my fingers. The sand felt cool and damp, but firm. Each print was too wide, too deliberate, and the toes, if they were toes, were long, unnervingly long. I thought I saw a shadow move behind the nearest ridge, but when I blinked, there was nothing but the endless dunes, empty, pale under the sun's weak light. My breath came uneven. The smell of damp sand filled my nostrils, and then the faintest hum. Low, almost imperceptible. I swore it was rising from the sand itself. I took a step forward. The footprints stretched ahead, vanishing, then returning, circling again, as if the dunes were breathing. A soft crunch beneath my boot. I froze. The footprints had changed. Deeper now, closer together. Like whatever made them had slowed. Waiting, the wind picked up, brushing my hair across my face. I could taste the salt in the air. And the hum grew a little louder. Almost a whisper, a sigh, calling me deeper. I wanted to follow. Curiosity tangled with dread. But my legs felt heavy, my hands sticky with sweat. Something about the prints, something about the space between them, was wrong. I looked back at the tent. It seemed smaller somehow. Insignificant. Vulnerable. The dunes were silent again. I could hear the faint hiss of the wind. The subtle shifting of sand under invisible weight. I took another step, and the footprints turned, pointing back at me now, not leading away, waiting. I wanted to run, but the sand had hardened under my feet. Every movement made a whispering crunch, echoing in the hollow air. The sun rose higher, pale and dim through a thin fog. The footprints vanished as suddenly as they appeared. No ridge, no shadow, no sign of anything at all. Only the sand. Empty. Still. I sat for a long time, listening, feeling the silence press against my skin, breathing shallow, tasting salt and fear. Eventually, I returned to the tent, but the sand stayed in my mind, shifting under some invisible weight. Soft footprints that weren't meant for me, leading back into the dunes, where no one should follow. And even now, when the wind is low and the night is still, I imagine those prints circling, watching, always just beyond reach. The ridge was cold. Dusk had fallen like a pale sheet over the hills. The lantern's light trembled against the fog. I climbed slowly, boots crunching on loose stone. The wind carried the smell of wet earth, mingled with something sharp, metallic. Every step felt heavier than the last. From the crest, I saw it, a tall figure, hunched, still, watching. Its outline was black against the fading sky, distorted. Long arms, I thought, maybe too long. I blinked, and it remained. The fog curled around it, soft and alive. I lifted the lantern. The flame flickered. For a moment, the figure was gone. Nothing but ridge and mist. Then the claws began, scraping stone, slow at first, then deliberate, a rhythm that didn't belong. I froze. The lantern wavered, casting shadows that grew and shrank. The air smelled of smoke and cold sweat. My breath came shallow, mingling with the hum of the ridge. It felt waiting, not for me to move, but for me to notice. The figure returned. Or maybe it had never left. The silhouette now crouched, hunched even lower, merging with shadow. Its eyes, or what I thought might be eyes, glimmered faintly, catching the lantern's dying light. I stepped back. The stone underfoot was rough, jagged, uneven. Each movement made a whispering scrape, echoing too loud in the quiet dusk. The wind shifted. It carried a rustling, not from leaves, but something heavier. Soft footsteps? Or claws dragging, sliding, carving into stone. I could taste the cold in the air, like metal on my tongue, and smell the ridge itself, damp and alive. Every inhale made my skin crawl. I want to call out, but the words lodged in my throat, swallowed by fog. Even the lantern's flame seemed hesitant, flickering in warning. I kept my eyes on the ridge. The figure didn't move, not really, but it shifted when I blinked. The hum of its presence settled into the stone beneath my boots. I felt the hair along my neck rise. The ridge felt narrower, the fog pressing closer. Something in the dark had weight and patience. It didn't need to rush. It only needed me to breathe. The lantern flickered again, and again it vanished. The ridge looked empty, but the claws remained, dragging, scraping, insistent, carving the silence. I swallowed, my throat dry. The air tasted of fear and salt. I could feel the damp stone beneath my fingers when I knelt for balance. The ridge seemed to pulse, slow and steady, like a hidden heartbeat. The shadow lingered at the edge of perception, not in form, but in feeling, a presence, hollow yet heavy, watching. Time stretched. The lantern dimmed. I stepped back, careful, tracing the ridge's edge with fingers that shook slightly. And then the ridge fell silent. No scraping, no shadow, only the fog curling around stone, soft and indifferent. I stayed there, breathing shallow, listening to hum in my own chest. The memory of claws etched into my mind. The figure did not return, or perhaps it never left. Only the ridge remains, cold, still watching. And even as I descended, the dusk lingering in my eyes, I felt it behind me, waiting in the fog, hunching, patient and silent. The desert stretched endlessly. Pale light lingered across the dunes, soft and fading. The air smelled dry with a hint of dust and something older, deeper. I was alone. The wind moved in lazy swirls, brushing across my skin. It carried a soft whistle. At first, I thought it was just the wind, a casual tune of air through sand and stone. But then it shifted, closer, more deliberate. The notes bent, curling around the edges of my mind. And then I heard it, my name, not shouted, not urgent, but gentle, soft, calling me from the empty dunes. I stopped walking. The sand under my boots crunched quietly. The wind tangled in my hair. I could taste it, metallic, like old pennies left in the sun. The whistle stretched and folded. It wavered between air and voice. Every time I thought it was gone, it returned, clearer, lingering in the hollow spaces between my thoughts. I lifted my hand, touching the ridge of a nearby dune. The sand felt colder than it should, grainy, clinging to my fingers like it had weight beyond sand. The sound, it seemed to seep through the grains. I turned slowly, scanning the horizon. The sun had dipped lower. Shadows pulled across the valleys. The fog that had been whispering along the dunes thinned, then thickened again, curling around my boots, my legs. The wind sighed, and my name came again, almost intimate, almost familiar, but wrong. I whispered back. Nothing. Only the whistle returned, bending, shaping, stretching in the cold air. Each note was deliberate, patient. I felt a shift in the air, a touch against my shoulder, maybe, or maybe it was the memory of being touched. The hum of the wind seemed alive, breathing around me. I moved forward. The dunes rolled beneath my feet, soft, uneven, endless. The wind followed, carrying the whistle, my name threading through it like a thin thread through cloth. The desert seemed larger, empty yet full, silent yet speaking. Every grain of sand seemed to pulse under my feet. I stopped again. The whispering whistle lingered, curling around my chest, my ears. It didn't ask. It didn't demand. It only waited. I crouched, letting my hands rest on the sand. Cold, rough, real. The wind kissed my neck, the faintest brush against my skin. The voice, my name, it hovered there. I wanted to leave, to step away and run, but my legs wouldn't obey. My body was anchored by the sound, by the weight of empty space made alive. The sun sank below the horizon. The pale light faded into gray. The wind's whistle softened, yet it lingered, not gone, just waiting. I stayed until darkness pulled around me, breathing shallow, tasting the air, listening to the memory of my name in every gust. The dunes became a living thing. The whistle became a living thing. And when I finally moved, the sound followed. Not close, not loud, just beneath, a hum, a whisper, calling me, always, even now, long after the dunes are behind me. I hear it sometimes, soft, curling through the empty spaces. My name, whistled on the wind. The desert was quiet. Late afternoon light poured across the dunes, soft and uneven. The air smelled of dry sand and something faintly smoky lingering from a night before. I had wandered only a short distance. The path behind me shifted underfoot, loose, unfamiliar. A faint rustling of wind carried across the ridges. I turned. The camp should have been there. The tent, the fire, the scattered supplies, all waiting where I left them. But it wasn't. Nothing. Only the flat, pale sand stretching out under the sun's weak light. The fire pit had vanished, leaving only a depression in the sand. It looked too smooth, too deliberate. And then I saw it. A figure. Tall. Still. Standing where the fire once burned. Its shadow stretched long and thin, warped against the dunes. I blinked. It didn't move. Or maybe it did, slowly, imperceptibly, in a way the eye almost misses. The air felt heavier. The scent of dust mixed with iron, like old blood. I stepped forward. My boots sank into soft, shifting sand. Each movement made the ground sigh beneath me. The figure stayed, waiting. I squinted. The sun's pale light reflected off the sand, glinting in shapes that weren't there before. The wind carried a faint hum, rising and falling with the dunes. It was as if the world itself was breathing around me. I wanted to run, but my legs felt anchored. Every instinct told me to move, yet my body refused. The figure remained silent. Its edges blurred slightly, as if it was folding into the air itself. The hum of the wind mingled with the thrum of my pulse. I could taste the dry dust in my mouth, and the faint metallic tang lingered on my tongue. I looked for the tent again. The space where it should have been was empty. No fabric, no poles, no sign that I had ever been there. I felt the sand under my fingers as I crouched. Cool, rough real, yet the memory of fire and warmth hovered in my mind. A weight of familiarity that contradicted the emptiness before me. The figure shifted slightly. Just enough to make my stomach tighten. Not walking, not running, but existing in the space where the fire should have been. The wind whispered through the dunes, carrying faint static, soft, indecipherable murmurs. I strained to listen, and for a moment, I thought I heard my own name, almost swallowed by the air. I stepped back. The sand slid beneath my boots. A small cloud rose, floating, dissolving into nothing. The figure stayed, patient, unmoved. I swallowed. The taste of dust, iron, and fear lingered. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that crept across the dunes. The camp remained gone. The figure remained. I finally turned, slowly, retracing my steps. The sand shifted, but nothing followed. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed, tracked. And even now, when I close my eyes, I see that shadow where the fire once burned. Still, waiting, in the emptiness of a camp that moved. The desert had fallen silent. Night draped itself over the dunes like a heavy blanket. The air smelled of cold sand and faint smoke from the campfire long gone. I stood on a ridge, alone. The wind had softened, leaving only a low hum through the dunes. Each breath tasted dry, metallic, and thin. And then I saw them. Eyes. Dozens of pale, glinting eyes shimmering along the horizon. Too steady to be stars. Too low to be anything in the sky. They weren't moving. Yet I felt them shift when I blinked. Each one reflected the faint moonlight, like shards of glass. The desert seemed to fold around them, stretching, waiting. I swallowed. The sand beneath my boots felt cooler, heavier, almost damp. The wind carried a faint hum, like the world itself exhaling. Every nerve in my body tightened. I wanted to step back, to retreat down the ridge, but my legs refused. The eyes held me, patient, observing. I focused, trying to count them. 20, 30 more. Too many to comprehend. Each shimmer carried a weight, a presence, a faint, rustling whisper across the sand. Not wind, not life. Something in the stillness, brushing close enough to smell the dry earth on its skin. The air carried a faint tang, iron and dust, biting at the back of my throat. I shifted, the ridge crumbling slightly under my feet. The eyes didn't flinch. Not one. They waited, and I felt the silence pressing in, thick and heavy. The moonlight caught something metallic in one of the eyes. Or maybe it was a reflection. The dunes seemed to shimmer with each blink of the horizon. A subtle pulse, almost a heartbeat beneath the sand. I breathed slowly. The cold night air stung my lungs. And still they waited, shimmering, steady, like the desert had grown eyes and forgotten to blink. I lowered my gaze briefly. The ridge felt narrower. The sand, rough and unyielding under my hands, seemed alive. Each granule whispered, shifted, pressing against my palms. The eyes multiplied, or perhaps I simply noticed more, shining in pale silence, staring, watching, knowing. I want to call out a single word, but no sound formed. Only the hum of the wind, tangled with my own heartbeat, filled the space. Time stretched, the cold bit deeper, and the eyes remained, unblinking, silent. Eventually, I stepped down the ridge. My feet sank softly in the sand. The eyes lingered on the horizon, following, patient and unwavering. Even as I moved away, they seemed closer, a presence behind the veil of night, shimmering, pale and impossible to ignore. The desert returned to stillness, but I could feel them, watching, always watching. Even in the quiet and the hum, in the shifting sands, their gaze never left. The desert was silent. Night had fallen, heavy and still. The air smelled of cold sand and faint smoke from distant, forgotten fires. I was alone. The wind had dropped, leaving only a low hum across the dunes. The sand under my boots felt firm, rough, almost alive. Then it came. A howl, deep, piercing, rattling through the ground beneath my feet. It wasn't distant, not coming from one direction. It surrounded me, bounced between dunes. A chorus with no source. I froze. The hairs along my neck rose. The air tasted metallic, cold and sharp. The dunes shimmered faintly under the pale moonlight. The howl returned, stretching, bending, echoing in ways a mind shouldn't perceive. Each note pressed against my chest. I wanted to step forward, but my feet refused. Every instinct screamed to run. Yet I stayed, anchored by something I couldn't name. The wind whispered again, soft, almost like breath brushing my ear. The howl rose, louder this time, splitting the night with a force I could feel in my bones. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the dunes, shapes that weren't there moments before flickered at the edge of vision. The sand under my fingers vibrated faintly when I crouched. I swallowed, tasting dust and fear. The howl echoed again from every side, high, low, deep, all at once. It seemed to pulse with the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I could smell it now, not wind or sand. Something feral, metallic, alive. I lifted my head. The moonlight revealed nothing. No source, no figure. Only shadows folding into each other, moving with the howl. The dunes felt smaller, closer. The night pressed in. Even the stars seemed muted, pale against the hum of the earth. And then it stopped. Sudden, the howl vanished. Only the wind whispered faintly across the sand. My breath hung in clouds before me. I sank to my knees, the sand cold against my palms. The echoes lingered in my chest, in my ears, in the small pulse beneath the dunes. I wanted to move, but the night held me. The howl remained, memory and presence intertwined. It had split the darkness, and I was still standing in its wake. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear it, faint, stretching, surrounding. A howl that lingers, pulling the desert air with it. And the dunes, they remember. The desert had softened into late afternoon. Shadows stretched long and thin across the sand. The air smelled faintly of dust and old stone, dry and metallic. I wandered among the dunes. The ground beneath my boots was uneven, shifting, alive. The wind was low, carrying only a hum through the hollows of the desert. Then I saw it, an old stone well, cracked, worn, leaning slightly to one side. Its mouth was dark, hollow, swallowing the pale light. I stepped closer. The air near was cooler, heavier. A faint smell of damp earth rose from the opening, mingling with the dust. I leaned over the edge. The stones were rough under my fingers, cold, solid, and from the depths came a sound, scratching, panting, low and irregular, echoing in the hollow shaft. Nothing could be seen. The well was dark, endless, yet the noises persisted, rising and falling, patient, deliberate. I held my breath. The wind brushed my cheek. A faint hum pressed against my chest. The sound of claws or nails against stone made my skin crawl. I stepped back slightly. The desert around me was quiet. The dunes still. The well's whispers filled the silence like a pulse beneath the sand. I tried to imagine what could be down there. Nothing fit. No animal. No human. Only the scratching, the panting, echoing into empty stone. The sun shifted. Pale light falling into the well's mouth. Shadows twisted along its inner walls. The sound became sharper, closer, as if whatever was down there could sense my presence. I wanted to look further, to see, to understand, but the darkness resisted. It pulled at the edges of my vision, holding secrets I could not reach. The wind sighed again, carrying the smell of dry earth and metal. The panting grew faint, like a slow, deliberate exhale, and then silence. I crouched by the well, tracing the worn stones of my fingers. Cold, rough, real, yet the memory of noise lingered in my ears. The echo of something alive, or something that had once been. I stepped away slowly, boots sinking in soft sand. The well remained, dark, hollow, patient, a presence waiting quietly in the heat and shadow of the desert. Even now, when I remember, I can feel it, the cold stone under my palms, the echoing panting, the weight of a darkness that doesn't belong in the light. The desert swallows it, but the well keeps its secrets. And I can't stop listening. The night was still. The desert air hung heavy, warm and dry against my skin. Stars scattered across the sky, pale and distant, like watchful eyes. I lay inside the tent. The fabric rustled softly with every faint breeze. The smell of dust and sweat mingled with the faint scent of my campfire embers. Then it came. A shift, not the wind. Something pressed against the tent from the outside. I froze. The canvas bulged outward. Soft and heavy. A paw. Heavy. Large. Claws digging deep, leaving long gouges across the fabric. I could feel the weight pressing in. The tent sagged beneath it. The sound of canvas stretching mixed with a low, dragging hum. My breath caught. The air tasted metallic. Every muscle tensed. I wanted to move, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The paw pressed again, deeper this time, claws scraping, dragging along the tent's edge. The earth outside seemed to shift with it, vibrating faintly under my hands. I pressed my face into my knees. The scent of fur, damp and musky, reached through the thin fabric. The weight lingered, patient, observant. The night around me was alive with subtle sounds. A soft scrape of sand, a rustle of distant brush. But the paw remained, heavy and immovable. I tried to peer through the tent flap. Only shadow, a dark bulk, taller and wider than anything natural. I felt its eyes, though I could not see them, watching, calculating. The claws moved again, slowly, deliberately, carving deep marks into fabric. Each motion pressed more fear into my chest, solid and tangible. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. A hum, low and constant, vibrating through the ground and into my bones. The paw shifted slightly, then pressed again. Closer, heavier, crushing. I want to call out, but the sound stuck in my throat. Only the scrape remained, echoing through the still night. Eventually, the weight lifted. The paw retreated. The tent sagged softly, relief in the silence. Yet the claw marks remained, deep, raw, permanent. I lay awake for hours. The desert night hummed softly. The air tasted of dust and fear. And even in the quiet, I could feel it, waiting. Outside, always waiting. The desert stretched under a pale moon. Night hung heavy, quiet, almost thick enough to touch. The air smelled of dry sand and distant stone, cold and sharp. I climbed a small ridge, boots pressing into the soft dunes. The wind whispered low, carrying faint dust and a metallic tang. Every step made a subtle crunch beneath me, and then I saw them, shapes, several, gathered on the dunes, blurred, shifting, neither fully human nor fully animal, form melting into form, as though the moonlight could not hold them still. I froze. The air seemed heavier, pressing in against my chest. The scent of damp earth and something feral lingered on the breeze. Each shadow flickered in the pale light, impossible to focus on for more than a moment. The dunes around them rippled with faint movement, soft breaths, too low to measure, rustling, as though the sand itself shifted under unseen weight. The shapes blinked, elongated, then crouched. I swallowed, my throat dry, tasting dust and fear. The wind carried a subtle hum, vibrating faintly through my ribs. Every instinct told me to move, yet I could not. I tried to count them. For 5 more. Each one shimmered differently. One moment a hunched figure, the next a crouched animal, the next something unnameable. The moonlight reflected off eyes, too many to focus on, glinting, pale, unblinking. The shapes did not approach. They did not flee. They simply gathered, patient and observing. I could hear soft footsteps behind the dunes, or maybe in front. Impossible to tell. The desert seemed alive, breathing in rhythm with my own pulse. I crouched, pressing hands to the cool sand. The rough grains clung to my fingers. The scent of fur, wet and musky, mingled with the dry night air. The shapes shifted again, folding between forms, merging with shadows. Time became strange. Moments stretched. The wind paused. The hum lingered, vibrating faintly in my chest. The figures remained, never still, never leaving. I wanted to step back. The ridge beneath my boots seemed narrower. The desert held me in place, anchored by the gaze of those impossible shapes. Even the stars seemed muted, pale against their presence. Eventually I moved, slowly, carefully, tracing each step in the sand. The shapes remained, watching, shifting, always just beyond the clarity of sight. The moon dipped lower. Shadows lengthened. The figures blurred further, melting into dune and night. But I could still feel them. A presence, patient, waiting. Something neither alive nor dead, gathered on the hill under pale light. And even now, when I close my eyes, I see them in the edge of vision, shifting, waiting, always waiting. The desert was quiet. Pale light stretched across the dunes, soft and lifeless. The air smelled of dry sand and something older, faint and metallic. I walked slowly. The ground beneath my boots shifted, uneven, whispering under each step. The wind was low, carrying a hum that pressed against my chest. And then I saw it, a circle, made of bones, scattered carefully in the sand, forming a ring too precise to be accidental. I knelt, tracing the rim with my fingers. Rough, brittle, cold. Some were small, cracked, familiar. Others were too large, too strange, impossible to belong to anything I knew in this desert. The air felt heavier. A faint static pressed against my ears, vibrating through my skull. The sand clung to my palms, gritty and dry. I leaned closer. The bones seemed to shift slightly in the corner of my vision, not moving, not alive, but waiting. A faint rustling rose from the dunes. Or perhaps it was in my mind. I tasted dust and iron in my mouth. My breath came shallow, trembling against the still air. The circle felt deliberate, older than I could imagine, and the space inside it, it seemed darker. A void folded into sand, pressing light away. I traced one of the larger bones with my fingers. Cold, rough, heavy. It hummed faintly against my touch, like a heartbeat I could barely hear. The wind sighed through the dunes. A subtle, almost whispered hum filled the space. I wanted to look away, but I could not. The circle held me. I took a step back. The bones were scattered perfectly, impossible angles, edges sharp against the pale light. The strange, large shapes pressed against my mind, refusing recognition. Silence thickened. Even the wind stopped. The dunes seemed to pause, waiting. The circle breathed. I knelt again, closer to the sand. The smell of dry earth mixed with faint iron, sharp and lingering. I traced a finger along one bone. It crumbled slightly, and I felt it, not just a cold, but a weight, a presence folded into the sand. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched, reaching toward the circle. Every grain of sand seemed aware, pressing softly against my boots. I finally stepped back. The circle remained, silent, patient, unmoving, and yet I could feel it. The weight of the bones, the memory of what had been, or what still lingered. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see the circle in the sand. The pale bones, too large, too strange, arranged in that quiet, impossible pattern. The desert swallows it, but the circle waits, waiting in silence, patient, unblinking. The desert was quiet. Dusk had settled over the dunes, soft and gray. The air smelled of dry sand and faint smoke from a distant fire. I walked slowly, boots sinking into loose grains, leaving my own print behind. The wind whispered low, stirring the dust, pressing against my ears. And then I noticed it. Another trail. Footprints, always behind me. I stopped, my own tracks pressing the sand, yet these were different, heavier, wider. Deep claw marks edged the prints, rough and deliberate. I turned. The trail shifted with me. No matter how often I looked back, it remained there. Following, the air grew colder. A faint metallic tang rose in my nose. The wind pressed against my chest, low and humming. The sand beneath my fingers felt damp, sticky, unnervingly alive. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on my own steps, on the path ahead. But the prints stayed, trailing behind like a shadow that had wait. I crouched, touching the sand. Rough, dry, yet imprinted with intent. Each mark a message I could not read. Each one pressed unease deeper into my chest. I glanced up at the horizon. The dunes stretched pale and empty under the fading light. No figure, no animal, only the trail that followed, relentless. The wind shifted, carrying faint rustling across the sand. Not far, not near, just moving. A low hum lingered beneath it, vibrating through my bones. I walked faster. The prints accelerated with me, always behind, always there. I spun again. Still nothing, yet the trail remained patient, unyielding. I pressed my hands to my face. The air tasted dry, metallic, sharp. The hum continued. Soft, constant, like breath against my skin. The desert grew darker. Shadows stretched across the dunes. The prints shimmered faintly in pale moonlight. Claw marks deepened, pressing intent into sand. I stopped. The trail behind me remained. Relentless, patient, impossible to lose. I knelt, tracing the edge of one print with my finger. Cold, rough, heavy. The sand pressed against my palm, gritty and alive. I could feel it, waiting. I took a deep breath. The wind sighed through the dunes. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Yet the prints were still there, imprinted in the sand, always behind. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see them. The trail that follows. Relentless, patient, unblinking. And I know it never stops. Night had settled over the dunes. The sky was pale with moonlight, cold and distant. The air smelled faintly of dust and wood, dry and heavy. I knelt beside the firewood, striking matches, rubbing sticks, anything to spark flame. The wood remained stubborn, unyielding, damp to the touch though it had been dry. I blew gently, warm breath against kindling. Nothing, only the faint whisper of wind moving over sand. I leaned back, tasting dust and iron in my mouth. The desert around me felt heavy, pressing close. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the dunes. Then I heard it, breathing, slow at first, soft, but circling closer. I froze. The air grew colder. The smell of damp earth and something feral rose faintly. My chest tightened. I struck the match again. A tiny flicker of light. But the wood refused. Smoke rose, pale and thin, fading into nothing. The breathing was nearer now. A low exhale, wet and deliberate. Moving around me, just beyond the circle of pale firelight. The desert hummed faintly, vibrating against my boots. I held my hands to my knees, tried to feel the sand beneath me. Cold, rough, solid, Yet the presence in the darkness pressed closer, patient, circling. The wind shifted, carrying whispers through the dunes, rustling sand, faint metallic tangs on the air, breath brushing against my skin, close enough to feel the pulse of it. I tried again with the wood, fingers rough and cold. The smell of smoke rose faintly, then vanished. The fire refused, as if the night itself had swallowed the flame. The breathing slowed, then quickened, moving around me, soft and deliberate, every exhale vibrating faintly through the soles of my boots. I swallowed, tasting dry sand in fear. The night was alive with subtle hums, tiny vibrations beneath the sand. Shadows shifted, folding across the dunes, just out of reach. I wanted to stand, to run, but my legs refused. The air pressed close. The darkness held me, anchored, suffocating. Eventually I sat, hands pressed the sand. The wood remained dead. The circle of my failed fire dimmed under pale moonlight. And still, the breathing lingered just beyond touch. The wind sighed softly. The desert held its quiet, heavy and infinite, and I could feel it there, patient, moving in the shadows. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear it circling. Close, patient, waiting, and the fire, it never burned. The desert was still. Dawn had begun to stretch pale light across the dunes. The air smelled dry, metallic, carrying faint whispers of earth long buried. I walked slowly. The sand shifted beneath my boots, cool and grainy. Every step pressed the hum of the desert into my chest. Then I saw them, ruins, half buried in sand. Stone jutted out at impossible angles, sharp edges softened by wind and time. I stepped closer. The air grew heavier, pressing against my skin. A faint metallic tang rose from stone, mingling with dust. Carvings covered every surface. Figures half human, half beast, twisted into shapes I could not name. Muscles stretched in impossible ways. Limbs bent against logic, frozen in strange gestures. I reached out, tracing a line along the cold stone, rough under my fingers, chipped with age. A subtle hum seemed to vibrate from it, soft, constant, almost alive. The sand shifted. A small rock tumbled down a slope. The echoes stretched longer than they should, ringing faintly against the ruins. The wind carried whispers across the dunes, brushing my ears. I crouched. The carving seemed to shift in the corner of my vision. Not moving, not yet, but the angles played tricks on my mind. Forms folded into shadow, half recognizable, half impossible. The air smelled of earth and something older. Something burned faintly in memory, metallic, acrid. I could feel it pressing through the sand beneath the ruins. I stood, brushing grit from my hands. The ruins rose taller now, imposing, patient. Half-human faces stared from stone. Animal shapes blended into bodies. Twisted limbs frozen in time. The desert stretched silent around me. Only wind whispered, threading through carved mouths and clawed hands. The sand hummed beneath my boots. Faint vibration, almost heartbeat. I took a slow step back. The carving seemed sharper now, edges biting at the pale light. The figures half glimmered in sun, half dissolved into shadow. I crouched again, pressing a hand to the rough stone. Cold, solid, real, and yet a sense lingered, something not quite dead. A weight folded into the dunes, patient, observing. The light shifted. Shadows stretched across the stone, folding into strange patterns. The wind carried faint rustling, like dry paper brushing against bone. The carving seemed to watch. I stepped further back. Sand slipped beneath my boots, sliding softly. The ruins remained, patient, silent, half human, half beast, impossible to comprehend fully. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see them. The twisted forms pressed into stone, waiting in sand, patient, watching, and the desert swallows it all, leaving only shadows and the hum of memory folded into stone. Night had fallen over the dunes. The desert stretched pale and silent beneath the moon. The air smelled of dry sand and faint stone, cold and heavy. I walked slowly, each step pressed into the loose dunes, crunching softly. The wind brushed against my skin, carrying dust and the distant scent of earth. And then I felt it, a vibration, low, rhythmic, thudding through the ground beneath my boots. I stopped. The sand beneath me pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. A smell rose, metallic and warm, blending with the dust. The desert held its breath. The vibration grew stronger, soft at first, then rolling in waves, like something heavy moving just beneath the sand. Slow, patient, relentless. I knelt, pressing my palms to the cool grains. The sand trembled, pressing faintly against my fingers. I could feel it moving, alive, waiting. The wind sighed through the dunes. A faint hum vibrated through the soles of my boots, through my chest. Each thump beneath me echoed, growing in rhythm, growing in presence. I rose, cautious. The dunes stretched pale under moonlight, shadows folding and shifting. The vibrations pulse in waves, rolling across the ground. Not just beneath my feet, beneath the desert itself. I tried to focus. The sand beneath me shifted slightly, soft and grainy against my palms. The hum mingled with a metallic tang in the air. I could taste it on my tongue, iron and dust, faint and persistent. The rhythm grew steadier, slow, heavy, like something massive running just beneath the dunes. I swallowed dry, tasting sand and tension in my mouth. I crouched again, pressing hands into tremoring sand. Each pulse pressed faintly through my bones, vibrating against ribs and skull. I could feel it circling, moving just out of sight, patient, deliberate. The desert was silent otherwise. No wind, no creatures, just the drumming beneath me, pressing the earth into subtle motion. Every instinct told me to run, but my legs felt heavy, anchored. I stepped back slowly. The vibrations followed, steady, unyielding, softly, inevitably, like the desert itself was alive, watching, moving. The moonlight shifted across the dunes. Shadows lengthened and folded, stretching across the trembling sand. The rhythm persisted, soft at first, then rolling like distant thunder beneath my feet. I sank to the sand, pressing hands against its trembling surface. Cold grains, rough, shifting slightly with each thump. The hum lingered in my chest. The desert itself throbbed, patient and immense. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel it. The sand vibrating beneath me, the pulse of something enormous, unseen, moving beneath the dunes. Patient, relentless, waiting. And I know the desert remembers. Every footstep, every breath, every heartbeat pressed into its sand. And it answers. Night had fallen over the desert. The air smelled of dry sand and smoke, faint and warm. The dunes stretched pale beneath a low moon, soft and still. I knelt beside the campfire. The wood glowed faintly, stubborn, breathing smoke in thin spirals. My fingers brushed coarse grains of sand, cold beneath my palms. The flames flickered. A shadow stretched across the dunes, folding slowly in the pale light. The desert pressed close, quiet but waiting. Then, for a moment, a face appeared. In the firelight, elongated, snarling. It was gone before I could breathe, but the image lingered. A metallic taste rose in my mouth, dust and fear mingling on my tongue. I leaned closer. The heat of the fire pressed against my fingers. Shadows danced across the sand, folding, twisting. The desert seemed to hum softly beneath me. I blinked. The face was gone. Only flames, warm and restless, curling against charred wood. The wind sighed through the dunes, soft, rustling, carrying faint whispers of movement across the sand. The desert held its breath. I stared at the fire, hoping it would come again, hoping I could understand. But only shadows shifted, folding into themselves. A faint smell rose, smoky, metallic, almost alive. I tasted in my throat, bitter and sharp. The warmth of the flames pressed against my skin, comforting and unnatural at once. I leaned back slightly, breathing shallow. The desert stretched endlessly. Silence pressed against my ears. The dunes seemed to watch, waiting. Then I saw it again, fleeting. The edge of a face. A snarl, sharp and too wide, folding into shadow. And gone. The fire flickered, low and stubborn. Smoke rose, twisting lazily into the night. The desert hummed faintly beneath my boots, beneath the sand, patient. I pressed my hands into the warm earth. Cold grains mixed with the heat of the fire, rough, alive beneath my palms. Every instinct told me to look away. Every instinct told me to run. But I stayed. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see it. The face reflected in the fire, elongated, snarling, folding into shadow, waiting. And the desert is quiet again. But I know it watches still, patient, waiting in the flames. The dunes lay pale beneath the rising moon. The air smelled of dry sand and faint sage, cold and sharp. Wind whispered softly across the ridges, brushing against my skin. I climbed slowly, boots pressing into loose sand. Every step echoed faintly, swallowed by the vastness around me. Shadows stretched long across the dunes, folding into themselves. Then I saw it, a lone coyote, sitting on a ridge, still, silent, watching. Its eyes glowed, unnaturally bright, pale and unblinking. They fixed on me, patient, unyielding. The shadow it cast stretched impossibly long, thin, sharp, bending across the sand like smoke. I could feel it pressing close, though the animal remained far. I stopped. The desert held its breath. Only wind brushed softly over the dunes, carrying a faint scent of earth and fur. I crouched slightly. The sand was cold beneath my palms, rough between fingers. A faint hum vibrated through the ground, subtle, almost imagined. The coyote's eyes did not blink. They reflected pale light, unyielding, patient. Every instinct told me to look away. Every instinct told me to run. But I stayed. The wind shifted. Sand rustled softly around the ridge. The air smelled faintly metallic, warm under the chill. The shadows stretched, trembling slightly, alive. I could hear a faint static in the stillness, like distant whispering. The coyote tilted its head, slowly deliberate. A low vibration hummed through the dunes, pressing against my chest. I breathed shallowly. Cold air mixed with dust in my throat. The ridge seemed to hold its own heartbeat, slow and patient. I inched backward. The coyote remained, eyes fixed, shadow folded and stretched. Time seemed suspended. The wind carried nothing but silence and sand. I felt the faint pressure of unseen weight pressing through the dunes. The desert itself seemed alive, patient, waiting. Even when I looked away, the eyes lingered, bright, unmoving, following me through shadow. The ridge seemed to watch too, echoing the patience of that gaze. I whispered to myself, breath shallow, tasting dust and cold. The coyote shifted slightly, not moving, not running, just watching. I stepped back slowly. The sand shifted beneath my boots, grainy, cold, alive. The shadow remained impossibly long, eyes fixed. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see it, sitting there, patient, watching from the ridge, waiting. And the desert hummed softly beneath it, patient and endless. The moon had dipped low over the dunes. Cold air pressed against my skin, carrying the faint scent of sand and dry stone. The fire in the camp whispered softly, smoke curling into the pale light. I checked the flames. They flickered weakly, struggling against the chill night. Every grain of sand beneath my boots shifted slightly, rough and cold. Then the wind stopped, softly at first, a gentle hush, and then completely. No rustle, no hiss, no crackle. The dunes lay silent beneath the moon, stretched and still. Even the fire seemed to pause, flames trembling but making no sound. I held my breath. The silence pressed close, wrapping around my chest. Every heartbeat thundered in my ears, sharp and solitary. And then I heard it, a panting, low, ragged, growing slowly, not distant, close, beneath the sand or behind some invisible ridge. I froze. The cold pressed through my skin. The sand beneath my palms felt unnaturally still. The air smelled faintly metallic, tanging against my tongue. The panting grew louder, steady, relentless. Every inhale, every exhale echoing in the empty desert. I leaned closer to the fire, its warmth pressed against my hands, comforting and unnatural at once. Shadows danced slowly across the dunes, folding and stretching. The panting pressed against the silence. I could feel it in my chest, a rhythm too heavy, too alive. Each thump against the ground beneath me matched my own heartbeat. I turned slowly. Nothing moved in the moonlight. The dunes remained pale, empty, and patient. The panting continued. Soft, wet, deliberate. It circled, or perhaps the desert itself carried it, echoing across the dunes. I crouched, pressing hands into the cool grains. Sand shifted faintly, trembling with each intake of breath. The air smelled of iron and smoke, distant and close at once. The desert was immense and waiting. Each pulse of the panting vibrated through the sand, through the night, through me. I tried to listen past it, to hear something normal, familiar, but there was nothing. The silence returned, folding around the panting like a dark sheet. It was everywhere. The air, the sand, the faint hum beneath the dunes. Patient, immense, unseen. I pressed my palms harder into the sand. Cold grains against warm skin. The panting pressed closer, closer than it should have been, near enough to taste. I dared not move. Even the fire seemed to lean toward it. Shadows stretching unnaturally. The night smelled of dust and iron, of heat pressed against cold. Then, as suddenly as it came, the panting slowed. The air hung thick. The silence returned, heavier this time. Every nerve in my body hummed under its weight. I exhaled slowly. The sand beneath me shifted faintly, grainy, alive. The desert remained immense, patient, watching. Even now I can feel it. The low panting lingering beneath the dunes, beneath the silence. Patient, relentless. And I know it waits, always, in the desert after midnight. The desert lay pale beneath a low, silver moon. Cool air pressed against my skin, carrying the faint scent of dry stone and dust. Each step I took whispered softly against loose sand, swallowed almost instantly. I noticed the stones first, large, jagged, arranged in a pattern that made no sense. A circle or a line or something between, shifting with the pale light. I bent closer. The surface of the stones was rough beneath my fingers, cold and grainy. The wind hummed faintly across the dunes, brushing dust into my palms. I looked away for a moment. The pattern shifted. Angles bent differently. A stone that had been to my left now lay far ahead, balancing impossibly. I blinked. The desert was silent. Even the wind seemed to pause, holding its breath. The pattern changed again. Each stone moved slightly, subtly, as if breathing in the still night. Shadows stretched across sand that smelled faintly metallic, alive with cold. I stepped back. The stones seemed to watch, patient, unmoving yet deliberate. Each grain of sand beneath my boots shifted softly, trembling almost. I crouched beside one, rough, cold against my palm. It hummed faintly, a vibration too small to measure, but unmistakable. I looked up. The circle, or line, was different again. Impossible angles, impossible balance. The desert had rearranged itself while I wasn't looking. The moonlight touched the edges of the stones, pale and cold. Shadows folded and twisted, long and unnatural. Every instinct told me to move. Every instinct told me to stay. I leaned closer. The air smelled of dust and iron, faint and bitter. I could feel the subtle hum beneath the soles of my boots, vibrating through the desert floor. Each glance away brought change. The stones shifted, subtly, deliberately. I could not look directly for long without fear. I could not look away without losing what I had seen. Time slowed. The wind whispered, but only faintly. The desert was patient. The stones were patient. I pressed my hands into the sand. Grains cool, rough, shifting with subtle life. The shadows moved across the ground, folding and stretching like smoke. I dared to step back. The pattern had changed again. A stone that had been near me now lay far off, tilting toward some unknown horizon. I breathed slowly. The air was dry, metallic, carrying the faint hum of shifting weight beneath the sand. Every instinct whispered that the stones were alive, waiting, watching, patient. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see them. Cold, jagged, impossible. Arranged and rearranged by some unseen hand. Shifting beneath the pale light of the moon. And I know, when I look away, they will move again. Patient, silent, waiting. The dunes stretched pale beneath a waning moon. Cool night air pressed against my skin, carrying the scent of dry sand and smoldering wood. I had been gone only a short while, gathering the last of the driftwood scattered along the ridge. The fire flickered softly when I returned. Smoke curled lazily into the night. But I wasn't alone. Someone sat there, a figure hunched by the flames, face hidden in shadow. I stopped. The sand beneath my boots shifted softly, swallowed by silence. Even the wind had stilled hesitant, as if it knew to pause. The figure did not move, just sat quiet, breathing slow and even. The firelight touched the edges of their form, pale and impossible. I could smell the faint tang of smoke on them, not from the fire, but closer, intimate. Every breath I drew seemed to echo in the still air. I stepped closer. The flames licked my shadow, stretching it toward the figure. The heat warmed my hands, but not my chest. I could see no face, just darkness beneath a hood, or perhaps a natural shadow. But it held weight. Something in the way of the figure waited, deliberate, patient. The fire crackled once, sharply. Smoke twined between us, thick and slow. The sand shifted faintly under my boots. Every step I considered felt too loud. I crouched beside the fire. Warmth pressed against my palms. The figure remained still, unmoving, a silent anchor in the night. I noticed a smell then, damp earth, iron, and something older than the desert, older than the dunes. It pressed against me with the quiet patience of a waiting storm. I wanted to speak. Words caught in my throat. The figure tilted slightly, though no face showed. A motion so subtle it might have been imagined. The firelight trembled. Shadows danced across the sand, elongating into strange shapes. The figure's presence did not fade. It only absorbed the light, the space, the quiet. I breathed slowly, counting each inhale. The fire smelled of smoke and wood, but the figure carried its own scent, cold, metallic, patient. Every grain of sand beneath my palms vibrated faintly, as if alive with the figure's presence. Time slowed. The desert held its breath. I felt the hum of the night. Deep beneath the dunes, subtle and endless, the figure remained, unwavering, terrifyingly calm. I dared not move closer. I dared not retreat. Even the wind seemed afraid to touch the space between us. And then I realized something. The fire did not grow brighter or weaker. The figure did not shift or lean. It simply existed there, a shadow stitched into the dunes themselves. I exhaled slowly, and the night stretched around me. The fire warmed my hands. The figure remained. Silent. The dunes waited. The moon hung pale above. And in the stillness, I knew it would not leave. I sat a little longer, feeling the cool brush of sand on my skin. The figure's presence pressed gently against the edges of my mind. Calm, patient, terrifying. And when I finally turned away, I could still feel it there. The shadow at the fire, waiting. The desert pressed around me, pale and silent. Even the wind seemed hesitant, brushing the dunes in whispers. The sun had long vanished, leaving a soft gray light that clung to the rocks. I found the cave by chance, hidden behind a ridge of jagged stone. Its mouth yawned wide, swallowing the last of the desert light. The air inside smelled of damp stone, and something older, something waiting. I stepped in, feet crunching over sand and small rocks. The walls closed in, dark and rough beneath my hands. Then I noticed them, scratches, deep and raw, covering the walls. They rose higher than any animal could reach. I ran my fingers along the grooves. Rough stone, layered with dust, carried the scent of iron and dry rot. Each mark seemed deliberate, endless, stretching upward into shadows. The cave hummed, not with wind, but with something low, vibrating beneath the stone. My breath caught. Even the air felt thick, waiting, watching. I moved further in. Each step echoed softly, swallowed by the dark. Shadows leaned and stretched across the walls, following the curves of the scratches. I felt a pulse under my feet, not the earth itself, but something heavy, distant, moving beneath the stone. The cave smelled sharper here, copper and alive. The scratches became chaotic, some jagged, some smooth, some spiraling impossibly high. Each one whispered a story of reaching, clawing, straining for something beyond the cave's mouth. I paused. The silence pressed against my ears. Even the faint hum seemed to retreat, leaving only my heartbeat, loud and shallow. I traced a set of marks with my fingers. They were fresh, yet dusty, layered over older, deeper scratches. They climbed the wall in impossible arcs, some ending far above where any human could reach. A rustle echoed, not wind, not sand, something brushing the cave walls. I froze, eyes wide, ears straining. The darkness seemed to breathe around me. I stepped closer to the far wall, fingers grazing the jagged lines. The scratches ended abruptly in a black patch of stone. No beginning, no end. A faint hum rose beneath me again, low, like something moving under the sand outside, reaching beneath the cave floor. I could smell it then. Earth blood, old stone, waiting. I wanted to turn, to leave, feet pressed into the sand, reluctant. The cave seemed to fold around me, stretching impossibly. The scratches glimmered faintly in the pale light of my torch. Jagged shadows trembled along the walls. The cave waited, patient, ancient, aware. I took a slow step back. The hum faded. The rustling stopped. Only the smell remained, sharp, alive, lingering. I paused at the mouth of the cave, turning back. The scratches seemed taller somehow, stretching toward the ceiling that I hadn't noticed before. I felt the weight of something vast, watching, waiting in the stone. The desert air pressed in, cool and clean, carrying the scent of sand and night. The cave behind me breathed silence. And when I left, I knew the scratches would remain, and whatever had made them was still waiting. The dunes stretched pale beneath the moonlight. A cool wind whispered across the sand, carrying the scent of earth and something sharper. Fear, maybe, or blood. I moved slowly at first, listening to the rustle of my own footsteps. Then I felt it, a shadow, stretching behind me, sliding over the dunes. It moved like a mirage, too fluid, too wrong. I started walking faster. The sand gave way beneath my boots, soft and yielding. Every step echoed in the still night, swallowed by the hush of the desert. The shadow mirrored me. 2 legs, then 4, then 2 again. It shifted in impossible ways, and I could feel its gaze without seeing eyes. My breath rose in clouds, pale in the moonlight. The air smelled of dry stone and distant fog, heavy with the scent of something alive. Every so often, the wind carried a low hum, or was it my own heart? I ran, feet sliding over loose sand, kicking up small clouds that vanished in the stillness. The shadow followed, always behind, always changing. I looked back once, the shape blurred, monstrous and human at once. It leapt from 2 legs to 4, and then stretched taller than any man. I didn't scream. There was no sound left in me. The dunes twisted around me, familiar yet alien. The moonlight stretched shadows into long, thin lines that trembled with every step. I could feel it close, smelling, waiting, patient. My lungs burned. The sand cut through my gloves and shoes. The wind seemed to hold its breath, pressing the silence against my ears. I stumbled. A cloud of sand rose and settled. When I looked up, the shadow paused, tilted its head. Then it moved closer. I ran again. The moon lit the dunes like a pale ocean, each crest hiding new threats. The shadow ran, slipped, twisted, impossibly agile. I could hear claws, or maybe stones, scraping the sand behind me. Closer, closer, and yet it never passed me. The dunes curved. The moon hung low, casting pale light over the shifting sand. I felt the shadow's presence press into my back, cold and patient. I tried to outrun it. Sand sprayed into my face, stinging my eyes and nose. Every time I glanced behind, it was there, never quite the same, never fully understood. The desert smelled different here. Metallic, sharp, alive. The air seemed thicker, pressing against my skin, holding me in place. I stopped, breath ragged, heart pounding like a drum beneath the sand. The shadow paused too, unmoving, stretching into forms I could not name. I stepped sideways. It followed, sliding along the dunes with impossible grace. 2 legs, 4 legs, taller than the moonlight allowed. Silence fell, heavier than the sand. The shadow paused at the crest of a dune. It waited, patient, eternal. And then I ran once more. Not toward anything. Not away. Just moving, propelled by fear I could taste in my mouth. The sand whispered beneath my boots. The wind held its breath. And the shadow moved in every direction at once. The dunes rolled endlessly, moonlight cold on my skin. The shadow stayed just behind, impossibly close, impossibly fluid. And I knew I would never leave this chase. The desert waited. The moon watched. And the shadow, it always followed. The desert stretched endlessly beneath a thin veil of wind. The air smelled dry, sharp, almost metallic. I could feel the sand shifting under my boots, soft and uneven. The stars were gone. All at once, the night sky emptied, leaving only the moon hung larger than I had ever seen, a pale silver that pressed against the dunes, washing everything in unreal light. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, bending over the sand like fingers that I moved slowly. The silence pressed against my ears, heavier than the night itself. No wind, no rustle of leaves, no distant hum. Just my own breath, loud and ragged. The dunes looked different under the moon, curved and endless, as if the desert had reshaped itself while I wasn't watching. Each step sank softly into sand, echoing against nothing. I thought I heard a whisper. Not words, just a vibration that moved through the air and into my chest. It made my skin prickle, the hairs on my arms rising. The moonlight was too bright, too constant. It painted the sand in silver that seemed to shift with each glance. I blinked. The horizon seemed closer, then farther. I stopped. The stillness around me felt alive. Something in the desert was breathing with me, waiting, patient. I turned slowly. No stars, just silver light and black shadows curling between the dunes. The moon reflected on the sand like a cold, liquid mirror. I took a step forward. The sand hummed faintly underfoot. Each dune whispered against the next, shifting, reshaping itself. The air smelled strange. Not just dry earth, but something faintly sweet, almost like smoke. It clung to my tongue and throat. I felt eyes on me, not from above, but from the dunes themselves, from shapes in the sand that were not quite sand, watching me with patient stillness. I walked faster. The moonlight followed, pale and unblinking. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision, too slow, too deliberate. I glanced behind me. Nothing, but the feeling of being followed did not leave. The desert had no stars, but it had awareness. My hands brushed over the sand. It felt colder than it should, almost wet in the moonlight. The texture shifted under my fingers as if alive, responding to my touch. I stopped again. The moon hung impossibly high, impossibly close. I could see the texture of its surface, craters and scars shining silver. The sky was wrong, endless, featureless, oppressive. A soft rustling behind me. I froze. Nothing visible, only the sound of the sand moving where nothing should be. I tried to call out, my voice breaking against the emptiness. It returned to me as a faint echo, slower than it should have been. The desert swallowed my words, leaving only the hum in the air. I walked on. Each step felt heavier, as though the moonlight pressed down, weighing the sand into stone. Shadows leaned toward me, stretching, curling, bending. I stopped at a ridge. The desert lay silent and empty before me, vast and endless. No stars. Only the moon watching, impossible and cold. I sank to the sand, letting it shift beneath me, soft and silver. The wind whispered somewhere far away. But not here. The desert was patient. The desert was still. And the moon never blinked. The desert night pressed close. Cold air filled my lungs, carrying the faint smell of smoke and sand. I moved slowly, each step sinking into the dunes, uneven and soft. The camp should have been close. I imagined the fire, its warm glow cutting through the darkness. But as I approached, the night felt different. The tent came into view, shredded, fabric torn, flapping gently in the still air. The fire cold. Only gray ash remained, dusted in silver moonlight. I froze. A shiver ran up my spine. The silence was thick, almost solid. I stepped closer. The sand around the fire was disturbed, pressed into paw prints. Heavy, wide, leading toward the tent, and leading inside. I could feel the weight of the night pressing down. The air smelled sharper here, metallic, like dry blood. Each breath drew it deeper, crawling down my throat. I crouched listening. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, but the paw prints, they were too deliberate, too close together to be random. I reached the tent. The fabric trembled under my touch. It was fragile like paper, but the air that passed through it carried a low hum, soft, deep, waiting. Inside, the darkness was thick, almost liquid. I could see shapes, shadows stretching too long, folding over one another. My heart beat in my ears, a slow, hollow thump. The sand beneath the paw prints whispered as I stepped closer. Cold grains clung to my fingers, shifting unnaturally, leaving no sound but a faint scratch. I wanted to call out, but my voice died in my throat. The fire pit held only silence. No warmth, no glow. The edges of the ashes shimmered faintly, like they remembered heat they would never have again. I traced the paw prints. They led inside, pressed deep, yet the sand inside the tent was untouched. The prints ended at the threshold, as if whatever had come had vanished into the dark. A soft rustling. I turned slowly. Nothing moved. The wind did not stir. Only the moonlight spilling to the torn fabric, pale and unwavering. I felt eyes on me, not from above, not human, watching, patient, unblinking. I stepped back. Sand sifted beneath my boots. The silence grew heavier, each second stretching longer. Even the cold air seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest. I could not move. The tent, the fire, the paw prints, they all whisper a story I could not understand. A warning, a memory of what had been and what had returned. The desert around me felt wrong. Shadows bent toward me, but did not move. The night held its breath, listening, waiting, patient. I sank to the sand. Cold clung to my hands, my knees, my face. The moon shone bright, silver over the ruined camp. Every shadow trembled in that pale light. I realized that I was not alone, not in the open, not in the dark. The paw prints were more than impressions. They were promises, a presence that would not leave. The air felt thick with something unseen, a weight in my chest, a hum beneath the sand. The night itself seemed to pulse. I stayed where I was, breath shallow, heart loud. The wind did not return. The fire remained cold. The paw prints led inside, and I could not follow. And in that silence, I understood. The desert had changed me. The camp had changed. And whatever had been here had not left. Dawn came slowly. The desert was quiet, but not peaceful. The sand shimmered pale under a weak sun. I could feel it in the air, cold, still waiting. Even the wind held its breath. The fire was gone, a memory in gray ash. The tent shredded. Everything around me waiting. I moved forward, feet sinking softly into the dunes. Every step stirred the silence, but it returned immediately, unbroken. And then it came, a howl, long, mournful, rising from nowhere and everywhere at once. It shook the air, vibrated beneath my feet. A low, hollow sound that carried through sand, a sound that knew me. I stopped. The hair on my arms rose. My breath felt heavy, loud, and still the howl lingered. I looked back. Nothing. The dunes were empty. No footprints, no movement, no sign of what had made the sound. The desert, it was alive in silence. Waiting, always waiting. The howl returned, closer now. Not a chase, not anger, a farewell, or a warning. I could not tell the difference. I wanted to run. My legs ached with exhaustion. But even if I moved, it would not matter. The sand shifted beneath me, like it remembered every step I had taken, every pause I had made, every shadow I had glimpsed. The howl softened, stretching longer, fading slower than it should have. And I realized something. The desert does not let its visitors leave. It only waits for silence, for stillness, for the acknowledgement that it is endless. I sank to my knees, sand clinging to my hands, cold and dry. The wind returned for a moment, brushing over dunes, but it carried no comfort, only the taste of dust, of absence. I turned to the horizon. The sun rose, washing the world in pale gold. The shadows of the dunes stretched impossibly long. The desert felt infinite. And I was alone. The howl echoed one last time, thin, mournful, bending over the dunes. It seemed to pass through me, a reminder that I was not leaving. I could hear my own heartbeat now. Slow, heavy, a single rhythm in the vastness. The desert waited, always, and I understood. No footsteps would carry me out. No fire could warm me. The silence was absolute. I had become part of it. The howl faded into the distance. Or perhaps I had faded into it. The sun rose higher. The dunes did not move. The desert did not blink. Only silence remained. And I was still, waiting, alone,